It was in the heat of the Nigerian Civil War. Celia and her parents have just come down from the north of the country where the war was very tough at that time. They were able to smuggle themselves back to their hometown because they were based in a town in the northern part of the country. A lot of people were not lucky to do that. They were trapped in that conflagration. So in their town, they believed now that they were safe and they were very comfortable. But it was not to be so. The war was already being brought to their doorstep. So they live in their hometown, somewhere in the southern part of the country. They observed that war has got to the next town, very close to them there. People were beginning to run away from that town into their own town, telling them that the war has got into their own town. But they did not bother as such because they never knew the war was going to get to their own town. So they just sat comfortably. It was not until when shells began to land into their own town that they realized what the problems were. So people began to run helter-skelter. A lot of people there have not heard about war before. I mean, they have not seen war before. So they were just comfortable at home. They were not bothered. In fact, they've not heard of the sound of shell. They've not heard a shell exploding or the sound of an exploding shell. What happened was that when the thing lands or when the shell lands, a number of people lay on the ground. That was when they began to observe or discover that this thing is lethal. Unfortunately for Celia and the family, they were just standing outside their compound when a shell landed and exploded. There was a complete blackout for Celia. She did not know what was happening eventually. She did not know what happened after that. She had blacked out. So when she woke up, she discovered that she was sitting on a hospital bed belonging to the Red Cross. In fact, she still had bandages on many parts of her body. She was very confused. She doesn't know where she was. She was just sitting there, looking like a moron. It has just hit her. Then by her side was a nurse. A nurse was standing by the side of her bed. It was the nurse that eventually told her that her family did not survive. That nobody survived after that blast. Nobody around there survived after that blast. Because all our family members were there. They were trying to escape from the house. They just got themselves together, wanting to run away before the shell landed. So it was the hospital nurse that eventually told her that everybody there did not make it. She wept uncontrollably. She began to cry. She began to shout in the hospital. So when they discovered that the wailing and shouting was becoming too much, they had to give her an injection, a sedative, and she went back to sleep. Later, she woke up again and she remembered her father. She remembered her mother and her senior brother, Ben. It was too much for her to bear. She still remembered that her father was pushing her down to take cover. She still remembered her mother How is she going to cope without her mother? How is she going to cope without her parents? She was downcast. She was not shouting. She was not crying or weeping this time around. She was just thinking. She was just looking into space like somebody who has missed her way. She began to think and think and think. Where is she going to start from? Who is going to take care of her? Actually, there was nobody that will treat you like your own parents. So if she was thinking along that line, she was very, very correct. But under the circumstance, there was nothing she could do. They were gone and gone for good. She began to think, there's nobody that can take care of her like her parents in the whole wide world. And truly, there is nobody that can take care of anybody like their own parents. People might want to assist you, but they cannot treat you like your parents will treat you. And the war had taken its toll on most families. In fact, almost every family in that town lost somebody. It was sheer devastation. It was like a disaster zone. In fact, it was a disaster zone. And a lot of people had fled. There was virtually nobody in town. We just had dogs scavenging all over the place. And some few animals that could not abandon, that do not understand what had really happened. A lot of houses have been destroyed and farmlands gone. There was hunger in the land because the farmlands have been decimated. The reserve foods that were kept in houses have been destroyed. The worst of it all was that Celia was penniless. Here was a teenager at that. What are you expecting from her? She had virtually nothing. There was this auntie of her, Aunty Mary, who resides in Lagos and had come home when she was told about the hopelessness of Celia. She met the village elders and they agreed that Celia should go to Lagos with her since there was nobody to take care of her. And Aunty Mary has agreed that she can take care of Celia. Unfortunately, it was not to be so, as future events will show. Celia, on the other hand, was very happy. She thought her nightmares were over, as somebody has come to pick her up. She thought she was going to see another person that will act like her mother. But subsequent events were to prove her wrong, because she did not meet what she expected. Back in Lagos, Aunty Mary was working in a nightclub. The type of job she does in that hotel was questionable. But she is a grown-up person and she owes nobody any explanation. But the fact remains that she makes enough money to take care of her needs. And that appears to be the most important thing under the circumstance. She was later to find the presence of Celia, an additional mouth too many to feed. It was not easy for her to begin to feed an additional mouth. But whatever the case, she was able to get Celia a school. But that school was at a very high cost to Celia's life and Celia's well-being. First of all, she was to do all the house chores, then do her school work, and then hawk some wares for Aunty Mary. She sends Tina all over the place. She doesn't give her any breathing space. And she hardly had time for her schoolwork. She was running 24 hours errands. For her, there was no breathing space. Yet Auntie Mary was never happy with her. She's either shouting at her or telling her things that a child cannot accommodate. Things got to a head when when Auntie Mary began to introduce Celia to her men friends. Celia, though a very young teenager, would not accept that. She came from a family that had value for a woman. Eventually, Celia disagreed with her and fled the house. She was not ready to do the dirty job that Auntie Mary wants her to do. She was not prepared to do that. Like she said, she would prefer to stay outside and live outside than yield to the request of Auntie Mary. Celia eventually went into the streets, having disagreed with Auntie Mary. She's had a few friends since coming to Lagos, and she thought she could cope without Auntie Mary. She also thought she had acquired enough experience about the streets of Lagos, because Auntie Mary has been sending her here and there, and she thought she had known enough to keep herself safe. But later events were to prove her wrong. Lagos is a very deep place. And for you, a child, to survive in Lagos alone without parents is a big issue. Meanwhile, school was out of the question. She has eventually abandoned school, because even if she continued to go to school, who's going to sponsor her? Auntie Mary was the one sponsoring her school. But they've had a clash. She was not ready to do what Auntie Mary wants her to do. And so, Auntie Mary, from all intents and purposes, will not pay her fees anymore. So she began to move from one friend's place to another. So as it normally happens, she began to add prostitution to her daily activities. It was just inevitable, because she was on the streets. In the process, she got involved with some criminal gangs. She began to run foul of the law in the process. She eventually became hooked to a man while she was putting up with one of her friends, because at that point she was staying in the house of one of her friends. So it was that friend that introduced this man to her, and they became, partners. Let me put it mildly. She was, however, beginning to fend for herself. She began to tell herself that her case was not a hopeless one after all. While she was with this man, the man decided to enroll her in a fashion school, a place where they learn tailoring. But her eyes were still in the streets. She wasn't going to abandon the streets just like that. She still kept looking outside, even though she was sent to learn tailoring. But she was doing well in her tailoring job. She was doing very well, even better than those who were staying with their parents. The man he was staying with was called Abe. That man Abbey was a member of a local criminal gang, although no one has been able to prove that he really belonged to that criminal gang. But that is, I mean, but that was what it was. He often does not sleep at home. He uses the night, night time for doing his questionable job. He was hunted here and there by the police, but they had no proof against him. I mean, before you can put somebody away, you must have some proof to convince a judge that this person has done this or has done that. And you must show reasonable proof. But Abby was always one step ahead of them. What Abby does is to use most of the day sleeping. And by about 6 p.m. in the evening, he'll wake up and go for his business. Also, he claims. No one really knows the type of business he was into. But no one, again, was willing to talk. All the while Celia was staying with him, he did not know the real nature of Abe's job. Celia doesn't know what kind of job Abe was doing, even though they live under the same roof. She only knew that Abe works with the local motor park council. That was what Abe claimed. But his lifestyle was very questionable. Nobody knew where he was getting his monies from. He had a lot to spend and throw around. And nobody knew where those monies were coming from. And nobody could prove anything. Abe and his gang were very clever. They were usually one step ahead of investigation. So nothing really touches them. And they continue to do and undo in society because the law has not been able to touch them. But one day he failed to come back home as he does every morning. Because what happens is that he comes home at about 5 o'clock in the morning on a daily basis. So this day he failed to come back. Later in the day, the police came with a search warrant to search his house. They found nothing incriminating, but Celia has not heard from him since that time. Further inquiries revealed that he was involved in a series of crimes, which the police were still investigating. One day, Abe tried to fight his way out of the police custody. He had this gang that were working with him. So they break into the police station and try to whisk him away from the custody of the police. In fact, they came seriously prepared. And in the course of their encounter with the police, they lost out. And that was the last we heard of Abe. Some people thought it was a good right dance to a bad rubbish. These were a gang of people who have been terrorizing society. So if they can be done away with the way it happened, very good. Also, some people thought. While this were going on, Celia became broke. She had depended on Abe to continue to live. Abe was spending. Abe had money to spend. But after the encounter with the police and Abe was not forthcoming anymore, Celia had to do something to fend for herself. She went into the street again and began to do what she knew how to do best. Eventually, she began to have brushes with the police, with the law, and with authority. But still, they cannot put her away. The justice system was very lax, and it was difficult to put people like that away, especially when they have somebody who's offering them protection. It was while she was under one of her many arrests that a man from an NGO saw her and took interest in her, or took interest in her case, because he was there to sort out a number of other cases when he saw Celia and took interest in her and began to ask questions. One thing led to another, and the NGO discovered that her case was not a hopeless case. They thought she was somebody that they can rehabilitate. After asking her a number of questions, they discovered that she was not a hardened criminal. She was just a victim of circumstance and a victim of the war that was going on. So they decided to enroll her in one of the local fashion houses to hone her skill in tailoring. She has had a number of experiences in tailoring in the past. So she took that opportunity very seriously. Celia does not really like being in the streets, but she had no choice. She was a victim of the Civil War like many other girls, her mates. It should also be noted that her mom was a very good sewing mistress. And while her mom was doing that job, Tina was assisting and was learning. She was a very fast learner and knows a lot about sewing. So when eventually the NGO introduced her or decided to sponsor her to learn tailoring, she picked up very fast. She became very good within a very short period. After her apprenticeship at the fashion school, the NGO discovered that this lady was a bundle of talents, that she can go far, she can go further than that. At least they've seen her desire to do more than what she was currently doing. So they decided to buy her a few equipments and rented a small shop for her. Celia had not looked back since then. She had eventually continued to gallop from one success to another. And that was a young girl that people had almost lost every hope on. Nobody thought she was going to become something. Everybody thought she was a very hopeless case, considering the way she was going in society. They thought she was going to die a criminal. The problem is that most of these criminals just end up, in an unfortunate manner. But Celia's case was a different one. And we thank God for her soul. Her sewings were very good, and a lot of people came rushing for her to do a job for them, especially women, because that was the area she specialized in, sewing clothes for women. Whenever she sews, people like it. Her sewings were perfect, right to specifications, and better than what other people, much more her senior, were doing. When you have stayed a very long time in a trade, one will expect that what you will put out will be better than what people who are just coming in will do. but not with Celia. Celia was exceptionally good. So she had plenty of customers. When most of the older hands discovered that she was taking away most of their customers, they ran to their union to complain. In most of these trades, they have unions, and those unions were supposed to protect the interest of their members against certain policies of government. That is, policies that they found uncomfortable. They felt it is better to fight those policies as a group than to fight them individually. But the unfortunate thing is that some people use those unions at the same time to oppress their members. So that was what they wanted to do to Tina. But Tina, being a street girl, refused to be intimidated. She refused to yield to their request and continued to do what she was doing. And eventually, she came out the better for it. So because she was doing a very good job, her job was recognized as, very good. People were coming to her from far and near. A lot of people have heard about her stories and we are bringing her clothes to sew. So as a result, she was invited to take part in a local show in Lagos. So when she got there, she performed better than every of her mates. She performed better than every other person that participated. So her work stood out amongst all of them. Fortunately for her, there were journalists, both local and foreign ones, around. They saw her, they saw what she did, and they helped blow her trumpet. He said that if you cannot blow your trumpet, then let us help you do it. That was what the press did for her. She has now impressed the audience at the Lagos Fair. With the impression she created and what the press has, talked about her, she was invited to take part in an international show that took place in Paris. There again, she showed class. She did a very good job and buttressed the fact that Naija no dey carry last. She again shone like a bright star. It was at this Paris show that she met the fashion billionaire called Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams has been a fashion person for a very long time. And he has built his billions out of fashion. After the show, Mr. Williams and Celia were to meet over and over again. They were originally discussing business. There was nothing about the whole thing. But like every human being, one thing led to another. And they became very good friends. After the Paris show, she was invited to other shows that took part in Berlin and London. And it became a constant thing, especially with the assistance of Mr. Williams, who already knew the ropes. So she began to get her contacts in most of these shows that were taking place in Europe and America. And she was attending all those shows and showing class. After the London show, Celia and Mr. Williams began to discuss marriage. Before long, they decided to get married. And they were wedded in a very elaborate wedding ceremony that took place in Switzerland. Celia was very successful in this business, and she was eventually able to open offices in Lagos, Paris, and London. She kept shuttling between all these offices and making sure that her businesses were up and doing. No thanks to Mr. Williams and his connections. She continued to grow those offices. Presently, she's having in employment 1,001 staff who are benefiting directly and indirectly from the business in Lagos, in London, and in Paris. She now lives permanently with her husband in Paris. So, from the smoke of a civil war, which she knew nothing about, Celia rose to become an international fashion superstar, running a fashion empire. The moral of this lesson is that we should not write anyone off today. A lot could happen tomorrow. Tomorrow is very pregnant. We don't know what becomes of tomorrow. If you have listened to this story and you like the story of Celia, please like this video, share it, subscribe, so that we can continue to bring you stories like this. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.